We begin by quoting a verse from Master Shantideva in Bodhisattva's Ways of Life, where it talks about the importance of this type of body that we have. It is a very precious body. It gives us precious opportunity, and therefore he's urging us not to put it into waste. It is something that we can appreciate in this life and in future lives. So it begins by saying this body that is established out of an impure or an unclean root cause, nevertheless, at its center, you can see the potential for establishing the valuable body of the Buddha. It is like the gold elixir that transforms everything. So it is talking about the body that we presently have. And on one hand, it says, if we trace back the root causes that establish this body, these causes of this material are impure, they are unclean. So we're talking about the sperm of the father and the ovum of the mother. There is no question that this body is established from unclean substances. However, on the basis of this body, we have the opportunity to practice pure Dharma. And by practicing pure Dharma, we can establish the body of the Buddha, which here it refers to the four types of body: the form body, the emanation body, the wisdom body, the nature body of the Buddha. So we have this incredible potential. So it makes, of course, it talks about establishing that result, the body of the Buddha, which is like made out of precious substances. And to achieve this, we will need to rely on a gold elixir. Now, these days, when you hear about the gold elixir and so forth, we kind of like tend to roll our eyes because it's not something that is available these days. However, in the past, bodhisattvas, through the power of their practice and the power of their prayers, had such capacities of creating elixirs that could transform basic impure substances into precious substances, and especially gold. So in particular, in terms of this body, having established this type of body, although it is impure and unclean, nevertheless, because it gives us the opportunity to practice pure Dharma, if we have this body of freedoms and endowments, we can progress and go up and up and up. We can make this life meaningful. And on the basis of making this life meaningful, then we can make our future lives meaningful and make sure we get a good physical basis that, again, will promote our practice of Dharma. And in this way, progress higher and higher and higher. Indeed, develop compassion, great compassion, bodhicitta, correct view, and traverse the 5 paths and the 10 grounds, and indeed reach the state of Buddhahood. So this is what is talking about, this great opportunity that we have with this body. There is one thing we want to mention here in terms of the presentation. Now, traditionally, when a teaching is given, it is given in 3 parts. The first part of the teaching is a brief introduction of the meaning. Then we have the extensive explanation of that subject matter. And at the end, again, we have a summary consolidating the meaning. So don't think that there is there is some sort of overlap, but it's not unnecessary repetition. So again, when we come back the next day or in the next session, it is part of the tradition to refer to what we covered in our previous session. Okay, so just to summarize, or in brief, what we talked about in our last session was the precious human rebirth. And we said the precious human rebirth is a rebirth that is characterized with the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments. When we talk about the 8 freedoms, we talk about freedom from oppressive states that actually gives us the freedom and the opportunity to practice Dharma. When we talk about the 10 endowments, we talk about the 5 endowments that come from our side and 5 endowments that are external. They are provided by others. So we want to make the distinction here that It is being a human and having the precious human rebirth. They're not the same thing. There are many, many millions of people who are born as humans, but there is nothing extraordinary about that. However, to be born as a human, and then in addition to that, to have the complete set of the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments, this is indeed extraordinary. The fact that here we are and we have the opportunity to meet the Buddhist teachings, that we have the opportunity to meet with so many lamas, so many teachers, this is a very good indication that we have been doing this for a while, and what is happening is like a pattern that is repeated from life after life after life. There is that progression. So it is a great cause to rejoice in having this. Okay, so we talked about the precious human rebirth, and we examined this from 2 aspects. The first one is that it is so meaningful, and the second one is that it's very rare to find. It is very meaningful because, as we say, it has this incredible opportunity that comes with the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments, and we can achieve a lot of things on the basis of that. Then when we present that how it is difficult to find, there are different ways to explain this. One perspective is to say it is difficult to find because of its causes. Basically, the causes are very difficult to establish. It is difficult to find, and we establish this by means of an analogy or example. It is difficult to find in terms of numbers, like statistics. It is difficult to find in terms of its nature. So last week, or not last week, on Wednesday, last class, we covered the first one, how it is difficult to find in terms of its causes. We said that the causes that establish the perfect human rebirth is stainless morality, that is conjoined with the supporting practices of the 6 perfections, and it is also complemented with stainless prayers. So when you hear this list, you think it's only 3, but actually these are very difficult to practice properly. Now, the fact that we are here today in the situation that we have is an indication that in our previous lives, sometime in the past, we obtained precious human rebirth. And in that precious human rebirth, we practiced morality, we practiced generosity and the other perfections. We did stainless prayers. And as a result of that, we obtained this current rebirth with all the freedoms and endowments. So here we are in this life, and you could say that in society, like in general, in our lives, we have it easy. We experience happiness. Here, of course, when we talk about happiness, what we want to say is that we are not oppressed under intense suffering. We have escaped that situation. So we're talking about temporary happiness, but even that, we have that result. We're not talking about ultimate happiness, because ultimate happiness is something that comes only when you obtain the state of Buddhahood. The fact that the happiness that we experience right now is only temporary happiness is because we have not fully subdued our mind. We have very strong self-cherishing, and we do not cherish others enough. When we have this very strong, ever-present self-cherishing, it means that there will be anger and attachment and pride and so forth that come from that. So we will not be able to get rid of those things and these attitudes unless we apply an antidote. And for beginners, it is very difficult to be able to fully apply the antidote and see the results straight away. However, on a daily basis, as we interact with others in society, we can train ourselves to always try to benefit others, even if we feel disadvantaged, even if we feel irritated. We have to say, okay, I am not going to give way to anger. I will just try to do something that will help others, will be beneficial for others. And this type of attitude becomes a training that allows us to progress in this way. Mm-hmm. So we have used this expression, we talk about a life that is meaningful, we talk about a happy life. And it is worthwhile to ask the question, where do I find this meaningful life? What makes the life of a person meaningful? Is it great wealth? Is it high education? Is it only rich people or people who, have wealth or have a position in society that can have a meaningful life? Can someone who is humble and simple, can a simple person, a low person, in society, can they have a meaningful life? So these are questions that we need to ask, and we have plenty of examples to understand this concept. Now, there are a lot of people who have great wealth, but actually, it's interesting to see that a lot of these people engage in activities that break the law, and a lot of them end up in prison or in the court. So obviously, having a lot of money doesn't necessarily make your life meaningful. It doesn't necessarily make your life happy. What about the second case, education? Having higher education, having many qualifications, does this make your life meaningful? Well, that on its own does not make your life meaningful. If you do not know how to use your understanding, right, or your knowledge for a good purpose, if you misuse it, actually you create havoc, you create disharmony, you create a lot of suffering in the society that you live, between countries all over the world. So we have seen many examples like this. When we talk about a life that is meaningful, really it refers to a particular type of conduct. And our physical and verbal contact actually depends on our state of mind. And therefore, a meaningful life depends on a type of mind that is relaxed and has a positive attitude. As the Buddha has said, you should try to benefit others. But even if you cannot benefit others, at least try not to harm. So a type of mind that is open, relaxed, and is not seeking to harm others is a very good foundation for a meaningful life. Okay, so we have explained that this precious human rebirth is very rare to find. It's very rare to find from the point of view of the causes. It's rare to find established by means of an example. It is rare to find in terms of the result that is established. So when we talk about the result, obviously here we talk about the presentation of causality, the cause and the result. And when we examine those, we can give examples of external cause and result and internal cause and result. So let's give an example of external cause and result. So let's say you like a particular flower. And some flowers are actually very fussy in terms of light condition, humidity conditions, and so forth. So if you really want to have that flower, it means you have to buy a special pot, a special potting mix. Then you have to buy the seedling or the seed. You have to raise it from the seed. And then you have to make sure that it has the right light, the right temperature, the right conditions. You see some people taking the pots outside during the day, then bringing the pot inside during the evening. So you really have to take care of all the causes and the conditions in order to have that special flower blooming in your pot. Okay, so that is an example of external law and effect, the law of cause and effect. Now, internally, when we look at that, we look at what is the situation with our karma and afflictions. And the thing is that if you wish to have the result of happiness, you must establish the causes of this happiness, which is virtue. And if you do not wish to have the result or the experience of suffering, it means you have to abandon the causes of suffering, that is non-virtue. So when we keep this in mind, we can see that those who obtain the result of a precious human rebirth are very few in number. So we have already mentioned, like if you look at the human population, within the human population, those who have precious human rebirth are a very small subgroup of the human population. Why? Because as we have explained, it is very difficult to establish the causes. So it's difficult to be born a human, but even more difficult than that, it is to be born with a precious human rebirth. Now, if we look in terms of numbers, which type of the 6 types of migrations of rebirths is the most populated one, the one with the biggest number? This is the hells. After the hells, number 2 in number is the hungry ghosts. After the hungry ghost, slightly smaller number is the animals. After the animals, a smaller number of rebirth is the demigods. After the demigods, you have the gods. And then lesser than the gods, smaller population is the humans. And then from within the humans, even smaller number are those who have the precious human rebirth. And therefore, in terms of numbers, those who have the precious human rebirth are the minority, are the smaller number. Why? Because to establish the precious human rebirth, you must have practiced pure Dharma. So unless you had practiced, you had another precious rebirth before, and during that precious rebirth, you practice pure Dharma, you will not come back again with another precious human rebirth. So keep this in mind. The precious human rebirth is difficult to find by means of the course, illustrated by an example in terms of numbers of what, in terms of the result, who achieves this result.
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about the 6 types of migrating beings, so we present them in 2 categories. There's those that belong in the 3 lower migrations and those that belong into the 3 higher migrations. And in particular, when we look at the presentation of the Lam Rim, the practices of the individual of the small scope are practices that are done for the sake of obtaining a higher rebirth as either as a god or a human. So it's important to examine and compare these types of rebirth. So, for example, to be reborn as a god, first of all, there are different opportunities or different realms. In the desire realm, we have 6 different types of gods. Then we have the form realm with 12 types. We have the formless realms with 4 types. The thing is that if even though you are born as a god, because you have the god body, that body is not the best basis for practicing Dharma. Actually, the human body is the one that is the best basis for practicing Dharma. So to give you an example, for those gods who are born in the formless realm, they have a type of body that is totally inappropriate for practicing the Dharma. So they have no opportunity to practice the Dharma. In the desire realm, we see, for example, male and female gods and goddesses, but they have good bodies, they have intelligence and so forth, but actually they are totally distracted in a hedonistic way, right? So they're just enjoying the beauty and resources they have, the flowers, they play, they flirt with each other the entire life. So this is not a good basis, a good type of rebirth to practice Dharma. So on the other hand, of course, within the gods, we have some who are inclined to Dharma, some who have developed bodhicitta, and so forth. Right? There are, for example, bodhisattvas who might be reborn, take rebirth as gods, and so forth. So there are exceptions, but the majority, the vast majority of the God existence is not optimum for practicing Dharma. And then we have the rebirth as a human, which is said to be the best type of body to practice Dharma. And within the human rebirth, those who have the precious human rebirth, indeed, they have the best opportunity. Again, to be reborn as a human, you know that we have 4 continents. And if one were to be reborn in the north, in the continent drumming in of unpleasant sound, again, that will be it's not a type of basis there, a type of body that you have there that allows you to engage the teachings of the Buddha. So that's not a good one. So from amongst the human rebirths, the best is here in the southern continent, the Jambudvipa. The Buddha Shakyamuni has come into our continent, has given the entire range of teachings of Sutra and Tantra. And the thing is that the humans of the southern continent, they have the best type of body for practicing Tantra and being able to achieve the state of Buddha Vajradhara. This body of the humans in the southern continent is described as being the body that possesses the 6 elements. 3 of those come from our father and 3 come from our mother. What we get from our father is the bones, the sinuses, and the semen, or the white element. And what we get from our mother is the flesh, the skin, and the blood, or the red element. So the combination of these 6 elements allows us to practice Tantra and reach the result of Vajradhara. So it's the optimum type of basis. So we talk about being reborn as a god, but being reborn as a god is not something that definitely you should wish for or you should pray for. It's nothing extraordinary there. Of course, a rebirth as a god is classified as a good rebirth, a fortunate rebirth. It is fortunate rebirth because it comes as the result of white karma. Okay, so it's a good result. It's a positive result. It is classified as a fortunate rebirth or a good rebirth in comparison to being reborn as a hungry ghost. So obviously, if there is a choice of rebirth as a hungry ghost or a god, the god rebirth is preferable. However, we don't pray for this type of rebirth. To be reborn as a human in the southern continent is much more meaningful, and to have a precious human rebirth as a human of the southern continent is something that is very desirable, and it is something that we pray for. In the liberation in the palm of your hand, in that Lam Rim text, there is a story that explains why actually being reborn as a god is not advantageous for the sake of Dharma. So there is a story of this person who was like a king among the doctors. And he was very influential. He was an amazing doctor, and he had great faith when he was a human. And he would always request teachings from Shariputra and so forth, Buddhist teachings. He would always, he would ride in the elephant and always dismount from his elephant and show respect and request teachings and so forth. So that was while he was a human. When he died, he was reborn in the God realm. And Shariputra actually could see this and was really worried that, he's born up in the God realm, and I wonder whether he has any opportunity to practice Dharma. And Shariputra went there to visit the God realm, and he found this ex-physician to be totally distracted in the pleasures of the gods. He hardly acknowledged Shariputra. So he was like in a state of confusion and distraction from all these pleasures. So it's important to understand here what we mean when we say to have a meaningful life, to make your life meaningful. And we have seen that this does not come from wealth. It doesn't come from a high level of education. Also, you cannot ask someone out there to make your life meaningful, right? Like going to the doctor and complaining and say, I don't know, operate on me, make my life meaningful. It doesn't work like this, right? And actually, these doctors do not have omniscience or clairvoyance, but actually, so many times people go and complain to the doctor. I have this is wrong with me, that is wrong with me. Can you please diagnose me? And the doctors at the end say, there's nothing wrong with you physically. What do you want? And of course, these are cases, most cases. The origin of all this is a mind that is disturbed. So, as the Buddha has said, make sure that you subdue your mind and act in a way that benefits and helps others. And this is what will make your life meaningful, and it will make your life happy. So we know the situation in a family. or any group, you have all it takes is one individual whose mind is disturbed, and they disturb everybody around them. Right. So just think, I don't want to be that person. I want to somehow control, I want to pacify my mind. So whether I do it through the practice of Lam Rim, whether I do it through the practice of mind training, Lojong, whether I do it through the practice of Guru Yoga. So let me listen, reflect, and meditate. So I have an opportunity here to progress through all the stages of the Lam Rim. The practices that are shared with the individual of the small scope, those that are shared with the individual of the middle scope, and then finally the practices of the great scope. So it's very important to really observe what affects us every day within a period of a week. Let's say a week is made out of 7 days. So every day, what is it that brings up that disturbance? On one hand, we have the elements, such as the elements of earth, water, fire, wind. And often the elements have a negative effect. They're almost like, they're not on our side, they're like enemies to us. Such, for example, the fire or the heat. This can be an enemy to ourselves. And then on the other hand, we have a mind internally that is totally disturbed. Why is the mind disturbed? Because we have so many expectations, so many fears, so much frustration for things that we would like to achieve but are not happening the way we would like them to happen. We have jealousy, we have anger. So when these things happen, we need to be able to apply some measures and control the mind. Now, for example, Buddha Shakyamuni and the Lam Rim is giving us so much instruction and advice. It's like, when you see your mind becoming angry, do not give in to anger. Try to practice patience, be considerate to others, be considerate to yourself, and so on and so forth, isn't it? So many times our mind just makes up stories, right? What will others say, or what others are saying about me? And then we sit there and we speculate, right? And we become so upset. So who cares? Let them say what they want to say. Do not disturb your mind about what others might be saying about you. But we constantly do that. We disturb our mind. We allow the mind to be disturbed. So we are on page 11. You see number 2, the reason for leading aspirants through these 3 levels. Although the practices of all 3 levels of spiritual application are taught in the Lam Rim tradition, this is done only because it is necessary to go through the 2 lower levels of practice as branches leading to the 3rd and highest capacity. It is... this actually explains the reason. One might come up with a question. It's like, what is all this fuss about needing to do the practices that are shared with the individual with the small scope and the middle scope? Why, if our aim is to obtain Buddhahood, why don't we just focus on generating bodhicitta from the beginning? So why do these other practices? Just start with bodhicitta and then go straight to enlightenment, Buddhahood. So the answer to that is that it is not possible to generate bodhicitta so easily. In order to generate bodhicitta, you need to have a particular type of physical basis, a particular type of rebirth to cultivate bodhicitta. So it is very important to do the practices that are shared with the individual of the small scope, because these are the practices that guarantee that you are not born in the wrong type of rebirth. What is the point? If you are born as an animal, as a hungry ghost, as a hell being, you cannot generate bodhicitta. If you are born as a demigod, you cannot generate bodhicitta. All right. So according to those practices shared with a small scope, first of all, you rely on the spiritual teacher. And by relying on the spiritual teacher, you practice according to the advice, and you obtain the higher good, which is a good rebirth as a human or a god. Again, having obtained this type of rebirth does not give you stable, true happiness. And to obtain this, you need to develop renunciation. You need to abandon all the causes that give you rebirth into samsara together with their imprints. And to do this, obviously, you're talking about reaching the state of liberation. So these are the practices that are emphasized and are shared with the individual of the small scope. But still, even having obtained personal liberation, you have not achieved your goals. You have not achieved your own purpose, and you're not able to establish the purpose of others spontaneously. To be able to do this, you need to accumulate an incredible amount of merit, and therefore you need to practice in order to generate bodhicitta and so forth. So this is how you can see it's important to go through this gradual training from the small to the middle to the great scope. I'll continue with the text. In the Lamrim tradition, you do not take up the practices of the lower capacity merely to gain the samsaric comfort of higher rebirth, nor do you take up those of intermediate capacity merely to benefit yourself by gaining nirvana or liberation from cyclic existence. You do both of these purely as preliminaries to the practices of the great capacity. The actual body of Lam Rim practice is that of the highest of the three levels. So it talks here about doing the practices merely or just the practice of the small scope. And it says, or just the practice of the middle scope. And it emphasizes that here, this is not the Lam Rim tradition. To do just the practices of the small scope is to be satisfied with that result and say, oh, okay, I got the rebirth as a human or God. That's enough for me. I don't need any more. To do just the practices of the individual of the middle scope is to say, oh, okay, I achieved liberation, personal liberation. That's enough for me. I don't need bodhicitta. I don't need Buddhahood. I don't need anything more than that. So as it is emphasized here, we do not merely do those. However, we do those practices as preliminaries, are branches that allow us to come into the Mahayana practice or the great scope practice of developing bodhicitta and so forth, right? So these are called the shared path because they are preliminaries. And the actual body of the Lam Rim, the main practice of the Lam Rim, is the practice of the great scope. Why is so much emphasis placed upon the practices of high capacity? Because there is no door to the Mahayana other than bodhicitta. And bodhicitta is the unique quality of practitioners of highest capacity. You must therefore develop it. To do this, you begin by contemplating its benefits and thereby generating a longing to attain it. So this paragraph here explains the reason, the purpose, why is there so much emphasis in the practices of the great scope? Because it explains the reason for that is because bodhicitta is the door to Mahayana. Now, often in the teachings, we identify doors or entrances to something. So, for example, we say refuge is the door or the entrance to the Buddhist teachings. Renunciation is the door to liberation. Bodhicitta is the door to Mahayana. Receiving an initiation is the door to Tantra, and so forth. All right. So the important thing here is that bodhicitta is the door to Mahayana. So because it is so important, it is worthwhile to consider its unique qualities and contemplate its benefits to generate the interest and enthusiasm for generating bodhicitta. Okay, so it continues by saying, okay, so it says you must contemplate the benefits to generate longing to attain it. And then it says these benefits are of two kinds, temporary and ultimate. Temporary bodhicitta guarantees the joyous fruit of a high rebirth. Ultimately, it gives rise to the liberated omniscience wisdom of Buddhahood. Hence, it is indispensable. So obviously, when we want to talk about the benefits of bodhicitta, the benefits are so numerous that we could talk about the benefits of bodhicitta for days and days. However, you see here the Conqueror, Sonam Gyatso, summarizes all these benefits in two categories. One category is temporary benefits of bodhicitta, and the other one is the ultimate benefit of bodhicitta. In terms of temporary benefit, it says that generating bodhicitta guarantees the fruit of the higher rebirth. So it guarantees you will be reborn as a god or a human. And then in terms of the ultimate benefit, is it says here bodhicitta gives rise to the liberated omniscience wisdom of Buddhahood. So Buddhahood, ultimately you obtain Buddhahood. So this presentation is actually, again, an indication of how important it is to have this type of rebirth with a full set of 8 freedoms and 10 endowments, because precious human rebirth is the type of rebirth that has the full potential that can lead you to the state of Buddhahood. And on the basis of this type of body, you can generate bodhicitta. So this is an incredibly important point. So, for example, let's look at Milarepa. Milarepa did not have any money. Milarepa did not have any beautiful appearance. At the end, he was totally naked. He didn't have any clothes at all. However, on the basis of that body, emancipated body that he had, he generated bodhicitta, and he obtained the state of enlightenment in that one lifetime. He did this by relying on his precious guru, Marpa, and following his advice. And he was considered to be the best student amongst the hundreds of students that Marpa had. So why was he considered to be the best student? He was not considered to be the best because he was famous, he was influential, he was rich, he was good looking, or anything like that. He was considered to be the best because on the basis of this human rebirth, he completely transformed his mind and achieved the best. Another example illustrating the opposite. One of the kings in Tibet was King Langdharma. So King Langdharma, obviously as a king, he was very influential. However, he acted in a very hostile way towards the Dharma, and he caused the Buddhist Dharma to decline severely at his time. Now, in Tibet, most of the kings, 99% of the kings, were Dharma kings, were supporting the Dharma. But Langdharma was an example of someone who, although being king, he just created havoc with the power he had. So it says, as a prerequisite for bodhicitta, you must generate great compassion that is unable to tolerate the suffering of all sentient beings. So here we have a reference to the method, the sevenfold cause and effect method of generating bodhicitta, which begins from recognizing all sentient beings as your mothers and so forth. So through this training, you have to be able to see that all sentient beings experience suffering and be compassionate, generate compassion towards the suffering of others. But you will not be able to do this unless, first of all, you recognize suffering, how undesirable suffering is on the basis of yourself. So the first step that you have to do is to look at suffering, wish to be free from suffering, focus on your suffering, generate renunciation, focus on the suffering of others, generate great compassion, special intention, and then bodhicitta. So this is described in the following paragraphs. So it says, this great compassion for others depends upon an intense awareness of the undesirable experiences and suffering of your own continuum. So first train in the practices of the lower capacity by contemplating the miseries experienced in the lower realms. From contemplating this arises a mind that longs for liberation from those rebirths. So you think about this for yourself and you decide you don't want to fall into any of the lower migrations. You want to achieve a better rebirth as high rebirth as a god or a human. Then take up the intermediate practices by contemplating the transient nature of the joys of the heavenly realms. From this arises renunciation of everything in samsara. So the next step is to consider that even if I'm born with a high rebirth as a human or a god, whatever happiness I have is transient, meaning it is not stable. Since I have not abandoned the cause of samsara, which is self-cherishing, self-grasping, and so forth, it means that once this higher rebirth finishes, again, I will take another rebirth in samsara and have to experience this suffering again. So generate renunciation. And then finally, thinking that all mother beings face the same suffering as you do, generate compassion, wishing them to be free from suffering, love, wishing them to have happiness, and bodhicitta, the aspiration to full enlightenment as the best means to fulfill that love and compassion. So it shows the order of the practice. Thus, leading aspirants to the higher capacity of practice by first training their minds in the two lower capacities is a supreme, perfect approach to Dharma. So, as we said, we have to practice Dharma on the basis of this body, this physical basis we have established. So now the question is, on one hand, we have Dharma, on the other hand, we have worldly activities. So how do we differentiate between the two? And how are we to practice? Does the practicing Dharma, does it mean that we have to completely give up all worldly activities? How is it done? So definitely this is not the case. For beginners, we have to continue practicing worldly activities along with developing our practice of Dharma. Only once you are reach very high levels of development, like the pure grounds of bodhisattvas there, only from that level, at that high level, you can say that they only exclusively practice pure Dharma without any worldly activities. So it is important to understand where we fit in this. We can talk about lay practitioners who have no vows at all. Then you can look at lay practitioners who have vows. Then above them, you can look at those who have vows of ordination, the Gelug and the Geshe ordination. Above this, you can see those who have tantric vows and so forth. So there are different vows and commitments that we have according to, let's say, the level or the occasion we find ourselves in. However, the most important thing is to understand this quotation that says, if you are preoccupied with this life, this is not Dharma. If you are preoccupied with samsara, this is not renunciation. So what this actually means is that everything is determined at our level through our motivation. So, for example, you could be engaging what is called a Dharma activity, prayers, recitations, pujas, and so forth. But the important thing is not what you are verbalizing, what you are reciting through your mouth. The important thing here that will determine whether this is worldly activity or Dharma activity depends on your motivation. If you're doing this, you can participate to puja or prayers with the thought that says, I'm going to dedicate this so I have a good life, I'm famous, I'm wealthy, I'm free from sickness. As you can see, everything, your preoccupation is about this life alone. So this is not Dharma, even though you're reciting prayers. All right. On the other hand, it's 100% worldly activity. On the other hand, you could just recite just a few Om Mani Padme Hums, but with the right motivation that thinks, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings, right? It's the scope of your motivation, the type of motivation that then makes the second activity, although very limited, makes it a true Dharma activity. It is very important that we completely get rid of all these expectations that we have about our future, our next life. Like in my next life, I want to be human, but I want to be healthy, wealthy, famous. So I want to be important. I want to be influential, and so forth. So when you're thinking like this, it does not become the practice of Dharma. To become the practice of Dharma, you have to have the right motivation and then begin this training of the practices that are shared with the small scope, shared with the middle scope, and practice of the great scope according to the Lam Rim. It is not the case that we practice Dharma and that means we have to abandon all worldly activities. Actually, the Buddha never said this. The Buddha never said you have to abandon your family, you have to stop working. It is not like this. You have a family, you have your responsibilities, responsibility in society. You have to keep, let's say, plowing the field. You have to keep going to the office. You have to keep your day job, basically, right? But if you do it with the right motivation, your activities become the Dharma. And then on the side, actually very good, you also do some other mundane tasks, and you will also get the salary at the end of the month to support your family. So this is how it should be done. The Buddha never said you have to abandon or stop all worldly activities. All right, so keep reading. To take the essence of your human life, there are 3 actual practices to be accomplished, namely the practices of the 3 capacities outlined above. So obviously, he will talk about the practices of the individual of the small scope, the middle scope, and the great scope. So it says training the mind on the path shared with the person of the initial capacity, so shared with the individual of the small scope. So we begin with this. So in this, we will discuss the issues of death and impermanence, the suffering, refuge, and the law of cause and effect. So what we have talked so far was precious human rebirth, that it is so meaningful, but it is very rare to find. Rare to find by means of the cause, by means of an analogy, by means of the numbers, because in terms of its nature, it is so difficult to establish. So once you have established that precious human rebirth, it is important you do not waste it with meaningless activities. And not wasting it means you have to practice Dharma. And the second thing that is introduced here, after talking about precious human rebirth, is so rare, you have to practice Dharma. The next thing is the uncertainty that comes with death. So you have to practice Dharma, but you don't know for how much longer you have this life. So you must practice Dharma straight away. So you have attained this precious human form, difficult to gain and extremely meaningful, and are now a human being. However, this life will not last forever, and it is definite that you will eventually die. Moreover, you do not know how long death will wait before striking. So you have the precious human rebirth, very good, but you don't know how many years you have ahead of you. Do you have 5 years? Do you have 20 years? Do you have 50 years, 80 years ahead of you? You do not know. Therefore, immediately exert effort to take life's essence. You have had infinite previous lives in higher, lower, and intermediate realms, but the Lord of Death, like a thief in the rich marketplace, has stolen them all indiscriminately. How fortunate that he has let you live this long. Generate a mind so filled with the awareness of death that you sit like a man hunted by an intent assassin. At the time of death, money, possessions, friends, and servants will not be able to follow you. However, the traces of negative karma created for their sake will pursue you like a shadow. That is how you must go from life. Think it over. At this moment, you are content to eat, drink, and consume. Yet life, wealth, sensual objects, and food just burn on, and you accomplish nothing of value, and so forth. Okay, so as you can see here, the author of this text gives us a very short presentation. However, in the more extensive Lamrim Chenmo, when it talks about how rare, difficult it is to find the precious human rebirth, it gives the 4 reasons. When it summarizes, it gives these reasons. Okay, so in Lamrim Chenmo, this presentation of the rarity of precious human rebirth, that then, of course, is followed by the conclusion that you should make something meaningful from this life, is presented with 4 reasons, or 4 features, you would say. The first one is that you must practice Dharma. Second one is you have the capacity to practice Dharma. The third one is that you should practice Dharma in this life. And the fourth one is that you should practice Dharma right now. Okay, so let's explain the first one. You must practice Dharma. So you have obtained this type of rebirth. But the thing is, if you wish to have happiness, you must establish the causes of happiness. And if you do not wish to experience suffering, you must abandon the causes of suffering. And therefore, because you wish for happiness, you must establish the causes of happiness. Therefore, you must practice Dharma. The second point is you are capable, you have a capacity to practice Dharma. And having obtained this type of rebirth, we actually have very favorable conditions externally and internally. Externally, we have met with a guru. And internally, we have this full set of leisures and endowments. So now that you have all those things happening for you, you actually have everything you need. You can practice Dharma. And if you don't, it means you're not making this life meaningful. You let this life be empty, being meaningless. Now, you must practice Dharma, and you also have the capacity to practice Dharma. So you should practice Dharma, but you should practice it in this life without procrastinating and thinking, I will practice Dharma in my next life and so forth. Next time. The reason for that is because we do not know exactly when we will die. So we must practice it now in this life. So as we say, we need to practice Dharma in this life. However long is this life, 100 years, 70 years, 80 years, however long it is. We should not be making excuses and thinking, I am too young to practice Dharma. I am too old to practice Dharma. Practice of Dharma does not depend on your age or is not limited by your age. So do not make these excuses. We have no certainty in terms of the time of death. So it is important to practice it right now without procrastination. So because the last point is you should practice Dharma straight away, because you will die and we don't have certainty in terms of the time of death. So you can see that this thinking naturally leads into the subject of death and impermanence. So then if you start thinking about death and impermanence and you say, after I die, there are only two possibilities. Either I get a good rebirth or a bad rebirth. Okay, if I get a good rebirth, it's okay. But if I fall into one of the lower migrations, bad rebirth, there is a lot of suffering there. So this naturally leads to the presentation of the suffering of the lower migrations. Okay, so since there is so much suffering associated with the lower rebirths, we're looking for some means to protect us from this type of rebirth. So we go for refuge with faith to the three jewels. So once you have faith in the objects of refuge, the next thing is to, again, accept and have faith in the law of cause and effect and past and future lives and how activities in the past affect the future and so forth. So just keep in mind that what we say here, this is a specific presentation of stages within the Lam Rim presentation. We begin by talking about relying on the spiritual teacher, then we talk about the precious human rebirth, then we talk about death and impermanence, we talk about the suffering of the lower migrations, we talk about refuge, we talk about the law of cause and effect. So it is a specific presentation. It's not that other people have to follow this path. Everybody follows this path. But these are the stages within the Lam Rim. So as you can see here, according to the presentation of the extensive Lam Rim, having introduced how precious this human rebirth is and how rare it is to find, the instruction that is given is that now that you obtain this very rare, precious human rebirth, you must practice Dharma. You have the capacity to practice Dharma. You must practice it in this life. You must practice it right now. If you actually contemplate these outlines or these bullet points of the Lam Rim, this becomes a very good antidote to laziness. we are subject to laziness. Even when we are physically capable, there is this mentality that says, I don't need to get up now, I don't need to move. So that is mental laziness. Or sometimes, even though the mind might be willing, the body might be lagging behind and have that physical heaviness, physical laziness. So it's important to contemplate this point to overcome laziness. Okay, so today we completed the section of how the precious rebirth is difficult to find, hard to find. So any questions?
Shira, if human body is the best body to practice the Dharma, how about the desire to be reborn into the Pure Land after this life?
Okay, so Geshe was saying, actually, it's interesting you bring up the Pure Land, the desire to be reborn in the Pure Land, because what exactly is Pure Land and how we define it is something that we debate a lot in the monastery. There are those who say that the Pure Land is a place that you have when you are free from suffering. Some say that in the Pure Land there is no truth of suffering. Some say in the Pure Land is a place that is inhabited by Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and so forth. But Geshe says, I cannot give you a clear presentation on the Pure Land. so apologies for that. Yes. Another question.
Sorry, I think this question, is about what you said earlier, Paula. I think, I don't know whether I got it right or not, but you said that this is a presentation of the Lam Rim. It presented in a certain sequence, and then I think you mentioned like it is presented in this manner, but then we need not follow it that way. Is that what you said?
Just to clarify. Other people, other trainings.
Other people.
Other trainings, other traditions don't have necessarily that presentation.
I see. Okay. Sorry. Thank you.